Hello and welcome back. We're going to be playing one final chess game for today. And we're going to play our normal time control here. It's a rapid game. And we're searching for an opponent. Alright, we're against the 1600 here as black, playing with the black pieces, and we have move 2, bishop to f4 here, signaling we may go into a London system here, and it's up to question whether this will be a classic London system or what's called the Jobava London system. So I will play the move g6 and leave it up to the opponent to decide whether he wants to go Jobava London or classic London system. So a move like e3, for instance, will signal me it's probably going to go into classic London system here. So I'll play bishop to g7. And the typical development we'll see is, knight f3. And we can castle here. There's no reason to not castle. We could also play knight h5. It's another concept that targets this bishop right off, but I'm going to castle. It's a flexible move. And we're expecting probably within the next couple of moves him to castle and then decide where to develop his knight. And so within these tempi, we are going to develop a plan to strike back in the center with e5, starting with d6 here. And we have c3 from our opponent. Knight b d7. And then we'll expect knight b to d2 and rook e8. Planning this strike back in the center, e5 here. Alright, so we have queen to c7, and I think e5 still works here. We could also play knight to h5 before we play e5 here. Let me see what we want to do here. We could go for c5 here is another interesting break we could have in the center, because this d5 square is protected. But then we may run into e4 here. Interesting. c5, e5. Also, I think I like c5 actually slightly better in this specific position. Okay, we have h4 really going for it on the king side here. And a move that we almost want to play anyway is knight h5 here, hitting the bishop, and that would block any further advancement of this pawn here from creating pressure on the board. So I think knight h5 in that regard is appealing. Are there any other options we could go with? I think let's start with knight h5 and ask this bishop, do you want to retreat here, or are you gonna play a kamikaze type attack against my king side here? And it might be actually pretty hard to play against. We'll have to play against this accurately if he goes for putting all his pawns on the king side. All right, we have bishop to c4 here, targeting this f7 pawn. Let's see how we want to respond to that. There is the move knight b6 here, attacking the bishop. However, that may actually run into a bishop sacrifice that is a little bit uncomfortable to deal with. But we can't outright prevent the bishop sacrifice with a move like e6. Notice it drops a pawn. So let me calculate here. We'll hit this. Controlling some key squares here. And hitting the bishop. And if takes, king takes is essentially forced. I don't think there's many good continuations for white against the sacrifice, but I am always wary of such sacrifices, I guess. I also like the move knight b6 because it now prevents certain pawn pushes. So here we can play rook back to f8, and it looks a little bit goofy. But I think this is a weaker diagonal for the bishop. We could also trade bishops here and just keep our rook towards the center. We could offer a trade of bishops. I don't think there's much that could go wrong, and then play queen takes. And it still blocks this pawn advance here. So I think, let's see. Yeah, I think this is fine. I think bishop to d7 is a little bit more straightforward here. All right, and now we have bishop back to. So this is a little bit uncomfortable for white now, because taking, he can't take here lest he lose the bishop. So he has to open up the c file where most likely a rook is going to land on the next move. So I think this is a little bit uncomfortable now. And we could even maybe have a sacrifice to win material here if pawn takes here. Okay, so we have knight takes, but this unfortunately I think runs into a fork here. I'm trying to calculate if white has a way to finagle out of this fork, but I think that's up to him to find. I don't see a way, and if he sees a way, good on him. But I don't see a way he can finagle out of this fork here. And we've been planning e5 since like decades ago, since the beginning of the game, and now it hits the board with monstrous effects here because of the forks on this piece here. So if takes with a bishop, I believe takes is fine. Takes with a pawn, rather. Could take with a bishop, but I think taking with a pawn takes this square away from the knight. So his knight will have to drop out back to f3, let's say. And now things get a little bit more uncomfortable for white as the rook now has a c file here. So I believe pawn takes doesn't solve all of white's problems, but it certainly didn't run into like a one move fork here. And I wasn't even calculating for knight takes because like instinctively I just knew somehow that was wrong. And when you can see this London setup, sometimes you like regret ever even playing the London when stuff like this happens, like e5 in the King's Indian. Like this will make you regret playing the London system. But yeah, we have this, and now he has to play down material. And this looks like a fork, but you got to remember that it has more defenders here than you have defenders on the square. So it is not a fork here. However, we could play bishop to c6 here, putting our bishop on a very solid diagonal. We could play rook to c8, eyeing the queen here. And we have a lot of good options here, I believe. We could even play knight back to f6. But I like the fact that, one, this bishop is still blocking like g4, like a wild kamikaze attack. And what else was I going to say? I also like the fact that there's another observation I was going to make about this position. But anyways, with all those considerations in mind, I think rook to c8 is a good move here. Very solid move. And it kind of leaves it up to question how is white gonna, like, how's he gonna defend his king here? So knight to h7 I don't believe comes with any, or knight to g5 here I don't believe comes with any threats. I said h7 because I'm calculating a capture here somehow, but I don't think it really merits much. We could play like bishop to c6. You could play bishop to c6 here. And this still discourages g4 because it hangs a rook in one move. Knight takes, I don't think leads anywhere because we can always like return or take a bishop. Let's say if it checks, if queen checks, we can always return to back to the center of the board with this bishop here supported by the knight and the queen. So I believe knight g5 is a little bit futile here. I don't think there is a good attack or square that it can go to from g5. He can go back here and run into like just a massive expansion. Ooh, so we have rook to h2. So he's giving up the right to castle this way, signaling that okay, we're probably going to castle now queenside. So what can I do here that is gonna disrupt, let's say, those plans? Something like this just runs into that, which weakens the pawn structure there. We can play here. He also may be looking to force this move, so we could play queen d2, and that's, or queen d7, and that's multi-purpose. One purpose is to prevent a move such as this. The other purpose is we can move our other rook and double stack it here potentially. Double stack it and attack this bishop that is still left on d3. Okay, so now we have the castle here. So he is now x-raying my queen. Could play like knight here, and this could run into like some savage concepts here with this board. F5 also looks kind of appealing. F5, and then like here. Okay, what I'm gonna do first, this is a little bit of a risky move. Yeah, let me not risk it like that. Let me play like more solidly here. Let's play knight here. And one purpose is it's putting a piece in between my queen here. Another purpose is I'm getting out of the way of this pawn. It's returning to the center of the board. And if we are able to like dislodge this pawn, we have this square for our knight. Or if it goes here, we also have a pin that we're looking at here on the queen. So we force his pawn to come forward here, which I think is good for us in a way. And now I think this is a tactical move, because if takes, we actually like take here, and it's a pin on his king. So I think here is a cool little tactic we have. And this threatens also to win the bishop here. So I think essentially it's GG. After here, we take the queen. And I doubt this is able to save the game here, because we still have a pin here of several pieces. So how do we weasel our way into winning here, I guess, is a good question. I think definitely the move is starting by taking this bishop here. Rook, okay, rook takes. He could have taken with the queen, but then we had this. And now we have something like here, but he's able to add a pawn. So I think queen to c7 is using more full board awareness here, because then we have the goofy e4 here, whereupon knight takes, we take this rook, and this side of the board, goofily placed on the h2 square, is a neat way I see of playing it. So I'm expecting like here, also here, kind of runs into the same concept, because we're hitting the rook, but in a different way, I should say. We're hitting the rook with our bishop instead of our instead of the, what's it called? Instead of the pawn. I don't know why I can't talk when I'm calculating, but it's kind of funny. And now we have like even checks here in this position. So here certainly we have this first. We have this first. Knight d6 is a good try, but we have bishop takes rook first. And if queen takes, we grab the knight, and it's just GG in like every possible way. If pawn takes, we still take the knight. If knight takes rook, it's a good try. We take the pawn here with check is important. So if knight takes this pawn, I believe we take this rook. But we also have the desperado move of sacrificing our bishop first. Sacrifice the bishop here, and then we take the rook. Does that create problems if the queen is on this? No, I don't think so. So let's sacrifice the bishop to gain this extra pawn first, then take the rook. Then grab this rook here. Or I should have grabbed the knight. That's just a miscalculation there. Yeah, but it's still winning. It's just I slightly messed. I could have gained more material. Slightly messed the material calculation up. Actually, no, I think this is still fine. I think maybe this was the best. But anyways, I think now we emerge up. Let's see, an exchange and a pawn. Because we have two knights here versus our knight and rook. And we're up this pawn. Yeah, does this create problems? We can go here, but then maybe he has this check. So maybe king here, and this diagonal looks a little bit scary, but I think we can push the pawn, push the p here. It looks a little bit scary to be along this diagonal, but I don't think there's any concrete ways that white can punish it now without much material. We could even drop our knight back here. Could even drop our knight back, returning our knight to a solid square here. And now he either has to defend this knight somehow, or he has to retreat the knight. Whereupon we are winning more pawns here. At a minimum. At a minimum, we're winning more pawns. Okay, and he has this move, so the threat here is pretty serious. We got knight takes, and since this knight is pinned, he's threatening to take the knight here. Obviously the queen can move in and defend. We cannot take this knight here. Can this knight add pressure? I don't think so, because then queen takes. We're also threatening the knight. So we have this here. And now I think his knights are also skewered in a way. But this is a try, because if I did take the rook, it would be a severe blunder, maybe even leading to some sort of checkmate after takes and then knight here. Okay, so now I take this knight, right? Yeah, now I think I can take this knight safely. And now I can break this pin, and essentially all of our problems are solved here. Problem solved. We safely got out of this position. Okay, now we just have to be careful to not blunder our rook here, essentially. So obviously he's not hitting our rook here. He's hitting this pawn. So we could even drop back and defend the pawn. Or just look to promote the pawn ourselves. So yeah, I think we'll just look to promote our own pawns here. Let's scoop up this pawn. And let's move our knight out of the way of our pawns here and threaten his pawn. All right, we scoop up this pawn, and his king cannot advance. All right, and we scoop up this pawn. And promotion here will be essentially unstoppable. Let's go here. Yeah, I don't know where his knight is moving here. And we have this pawn. And let's finally restrict his king from returning. Win this pawn. Restrict his knight here from grabbing our piece, or our pawn, I should say. And the king will not be able to. Nice tactic there at the end, and I guess we can demonstrate here how to mate with a queen. So first we will restrict the king onto the back rank here. Alright, and now the king has these squares to move to. So we move our king up and checkmate on the back rank. Alright, so that was a successful London system versus King's Indian game, if that makes sense. So we got L. Lolliot from Death Note or something. But d4, knight f6, bishop f4 signals the London system, and bishop g7. Essentially, against the non-Jobava, like the classical London system, the bishop g7 line with the King's Indian is a good way to play against that. because of the preparation of the move e5 here in the center break e5. So this is very typical development. And the move queen c2, maybe I misjudged this, but I like the c5 break a little bit better, since now the c file has the potential of opening there in the long run, but e5 is still probably just as good here. I played c5, which is a lot of the time an alternate pawn break you'll see you can play in the King's Indian. And then, yeah, I went with knight h5 here just because I didn't want to allow the pawn to h5. And secondary purpose is it's hitting the bishop here, putting pressure on the bishop. So bishop to c4. I don't know exactly why, what was the point of this. Maybe he was considering a sacrifice there. I went knight to b6, trying to kick the bishop back to, and then bishop to b5. I thought, okay, let's just develop another piece here. Bishop b7 is kind of principled. We're just using it to develop another piece. And if he trades, we develop, I guess, our queen, you can say. So bishop goes back. And now we have, yeah, c takes. This looks now very uncomfortable for white to deal with, because if this we take, if knight takes, we fork, and if here we play rook c8, right? So I just saw after c takes, there's only a lot of bad options for white to play here, and he plays probably the worst of them, which is knight takes, allowing this fork here, and he has to desperado after this. So he returns back to f3 after the loss of material here. And then I play rook to c8, establishing a rook on this file. He's probably also eventually going to castle into it, is my thought process. And I kind of just ignored knight g5 because I didn't see any threats that he posed with that move. And I went bishop to c6 here. Yeah, rook to h2, kind of a goofy move to protect the pawn. And then we have the double A battery of the queen and rook are about to be formed here. So long castles, and then how did I play this? I was struggling a little bit to find like a good move here. Yeah, I played knight to d5. I mean, there's a lot of ways to win in this position. Obviously, like double stacking is going with the same plan is very straightforward. But I went knight to d5 because I saw some tactics here that could work to win the queen in a way. And knight b4, yeah, it walks into knight b4. So after you remove this pawn, this, you should notice, is running into this x-ray, and now we only have to sacrifice this bishop here in order to make that happen. So yeah, bishop a4, definitely I missed that. Was a way clear, a much clearer and more effective means to win the queen in that position, and this was actually just a severe blunder on my part. Bishop takes, because it's unnecessary to sacrifice the bishop to get the same effect on the queen here. So knight d taking would definitely somehow hold the position together, but this we're able to piece it apart. So definitely bishop takes first, removing one of the defenders from the knight is the first step to this, and then rook takes because you don't want to give up the knight here. So yeah, and then I chose to go with queen c7, is just hitting the rook here, or x-raying the rook rather, and hitting the knight, and also leaving it up into the air if we can play e4. So I thought e4 worked here tactically. Yeah, e4 still works tactically. Bishop, because the bishop hits the rook here and the queen hits the other rook. That's placed on h2. That's just brutal. And then yeah, this is a good try because if I had taken the knight here, if you get distracted and take the knight, this leads to like some serious problems actually for black, and white is now winning if you take the knight. And it's also revealing an attack against the queen. The correct way is not to get distracted. You take the rook. Definitely is the right choice. We have hit the rook. Don't forget about your other threats in that position. So we hit the rook. He takes on c8. Yeah, I definitely should have probably taken on c8, and maintained like this file, but I just took on h2. I guess it's like equally as fine, they say. So I desperadoed the bishop to get another pawn. Apparently the engine is like, what the hell am I doing? But yeah, rook queen takes, I guess, was correct. I did play the correct move. And yeah, knight. That's just a free knight. Why didn't I just take the knight? Was I scared of like, yeah. I guess I didn't see that that's a free knight. Our opponent was very generous, I guess, this game. Knight f6, and then this looks very scary. We can still defend it with either queen takes or queen moves here. So queen moves to f4, defending the knight. And then we pick up the free knight finally on e7. That was hanging there for generations. Okay, and now we just defuse this entire situation with queen e5. We remove the pin, and with it, all of our opponent's hopes of winning. So we have the queens off the board, and now we are simply up a rook, which is game over, essentially. You're forced to resign or lose everything in very short fashion. And the rest of this endgame is pretty basic. And we force the king into the corner and mate. All right, so that was a solid King's Indian game against the London system here. So if we can analyze, I guess, the opening, the only thing that I found different in this opening versus previous openings our opponents have played is that in this position, instead of castling, he did play queen c2 and add a defender to the e4 square. And that slight alteration, I guess, is what I noticed to make me judge that c5 was probably well timed in this position rather than e5. And what it's doing is c5 is distracting this pawn. And if takes, you get your knight in and you're hitting the bishop very, very happily, hitting the bishop here, because basically he has to like disintegrate this battery here. It's a good positional move in general. c5, it also, if d5 hits the board, remember it's unguarded, we just take with a knight, was also another consideration I had in mind. And if e4, I just thought like, well, let's see. e4, I was thinking we can take and then play e5 still. So something like e4, trying to build a big center, I saw was like a positional attempt. Yeah, c takes, and e5. Yeah, that's what I calculated. I calculated c takes, e5, and then takes, or whatever, and then we have the open C file and basically equal central control here. So I thought the C file was beneficial for black. So E4, I saw ultimately it fails probably to C takes. So, and then H4 getting wild here down the flank. He probably just should have castled and played it more long term. We would respond like knight H5. But yeah. So that is another theme you can think about for your Kings Indians games. Pushing C5 is an alternate pawn break. You don't always have to force E5 somehow. You can play C5. There's also like B6 fianchettoing. But let's see what the engine gives. After Queen C2, it says go with E5. I mean, there's nothing wrong with going to E5. It's what I've advocated for in all the other videos, and a slightly different variation where they castle instead of Queen C2. Yeah, E5, H6, C5, Knight H5, any of these. Knight H5, the purpose is you're hitting this bishop before and adding another defender to E5 before pushing E5. But all of those are very good options. B6, preparing to fianchetto long waves here against black's king side is very nice. The only consideration also with Queen C2 is that white may actually castle queen side and bring his rooks over here and start attacking down your king side. So that is also a good reason to want to open the C file in the long run as well, is white may have his king on the C file and you may want to bring your rook here to counter pressure that side of the board. So yeah, I hope that kind of explains why I went with the C5 pawn push instead of the more straightforward E5 in that game. And that basically completes my opening analysis for that video. I've analyzed the King's Indian versus the London system in other games, and I still think it's a very solid approach to counter London systems. And yeah, that will be the end of this video though. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.